Okay, so let's get going. So if you've pulled down the example that I pushed up to Discord, you should have something like this, because this is where we're heading today. So I've got in a scroll view, a recycler view, I've got a few different items here. So I've got cobra, crocodile, dolphin. If I hit the little plus button down here, it'll take me to this new word screen, and there I can type in another word. So let's type in test. I'm going to hit save, and you can see how that gets added to the list. I can go back in there, and I can add more words. Okay. Now, with the way that this is set up right now, for testing purposes, if I leave the app and come back, it will go ahead and recreate the database. That's per at least the way the example is set up. It's a very easy change to change this so that it preserves that data. But right now, that's the way that this functions. So if we say close the app, I'm going to go leave it, shut it down, run it again. We're going to see that it recreates. It recreates that database from the scratch. That's just how it's set up. Now, the reason that it's doing that, if I go into, let's see, I want to go into the Word database. Right now it's doing that because it's responding to the onOpen method. So that onOpen method is called every time that the application starts. So it's deleting all the data and then re-adding dolphin, crocodile, and cobra. So if I just change this to be onCreate instead of onOpen, what we're going to see is that it only creates that data the first time the application runs. So what that means is I can go in here and say test, save, hi, save. So that data is there. I'm going to close the application and run it again. And you can see that data is still preserved. So that's all that's what's happening there. If it looks like when you're playing around it, it's like your data is being lost and you kind of maybe don't see the point of having a database in the first place, that's just because of how this example is set up. So that example, to make testing it easier, throws away all the data when you leave it and come back. That makes changes to the schema a lot easier as well. It makes getting your initial data in there easier. So that's all you have to change. Change it from onOpen to onCreate, and then it won't reset your data every time you leave it. But if you want to reset it, you want it to reset every time, that's where onOpen's being used. Okay. So what we want to go through today is kind of basically I'm going to go through part of what's on the 10.1 labs, but I'm going to take a different route to it. And part of that, the main reason for that is because I want to break this up over more than one session. So I want to say, let's talk about just the room stuff today. And then we'll talk about, how does live data and the view model classes, and the repo, how do all those interact with this kind of application. But we're going to start it with just room as being really the only thing we're using. Okay. So this is kind of the finished project. I'm going to start a new project running through here. So what do we need to name the project? So we need to name the project room word sample. Okay, so I'm going to create a new project. We're going to start with the basic activity. And this is going to be room word sample live. This is my live example. Okay. So we're going to create that. And this is using a basic activity. Do make sure that you start this with a basic activity, because we do want the FAB down in the bottom corner. Okay. All right, so I'm going to create this new project. Yes, I do want to add all that to version control. I'm going to take my other project, my finished project, stick it on another screen so I have a reference to it. And then we'll start going from here. So before we do anything with the code, I need to set up a few things in the Gradle so that we have the proper dependencies for room. Okay. Now, these are the dependencies over here. You can see the 6 dependencies that they're using. These 3 for room, these 2 for lifecycle. Those were the versions at the time that this tutorial, this lab was written. Those have since been superseded by other dependencies. So what we want to do is look up what those new dependencies are. Now, the documentation down here says, okay, well, it was 111 at the time of this writing. Go follow this link to see what the current version numbers are. Okay, so we're going to follow this link, and this is going to lead us to all the new things we need. Okay, so we need to add a few things to our project. So the first thing that it tells us to do in here, in order to use any of these, we need to make sure that we have the Google repository, which we already do, and it gets added automatically. To just verify that it's already there, you can go to your project, Gradle, and you'll see that it's here under repositories. So that's already added. Same thing here. So what we want to do next is we need to add our actual dependencies here. There's a few different links because the different dependencies you need to add are different, vary depending on what architecture components you're adding. So for instance, for this particular project, we need the room components as well as the lifecycle components. So I'm going to add the room components first. Okay, so let's open that one in a new tab. Let me scroll down. Okay, so here's everything that needs to be added. Okay, so the first thing we need is this def room number. Okay, so that's the current version of room, and the reason we're kind of putting that in a variable is to make sure that all of these things stay in sync with the same version of room. Okay. So sorry. So I'm going to add that, basically that variable room version here. The next thing I need to do is add the relevant dependencies. So if I'm looking at what's here, there are actually quite a few dependencies. So we can see these 2 ones are definitely mandatory. So I need I need the implementation one here as well as the room version. I'm going to leave the comment off because I'm not really interested in Kotlin for this exercise. So that's what I want to bring over, is this implementation, that annotation processor. So this is the kind of core room dependency, as well as this annotation processor, which is going to go look at all of those annotations that we added to our DAOs and our entities and help turn that into code automatically. Okay, so we need those 2 dependencies. We're also going to want to add this potentially, this last dependency, which is if you want to do unit testing or automated testing with room. So let's add that dependency in here too. Okay, so those are my room components. So that's how I'm going to add those in, and I'm going to save a link to this page just in case we need to go back and update that in the future. So this page here, let's link that. That way I can easily go back and refer to the page where I found this. We won't bring in any of these optional dependencies because we won't need them for what we're doing. Okay. Next thing I need to do is add the lifecycle dependencies. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to open up the lifecycle components page here. Okay, so I also need to add in some more dependencies for that. So life cycle components. Okay, I'm also going to save a link to this so we can refer back to it later should we need it. And then when I grab those two version numbers, so the lifecycle version and the architecture version, because there's basically two different libraries kind of bundled in here together. If you're having, Dalton, if you're having it do weird things with Android Studio, the best thing I can recommend to you is to shut down all other versions of Android Studio that you have running. If you're having weird issues like that, it's more than likely a case that your devices, that your computer's running out of memory. It could be something else, but that can be maybe my suspicion. That's interesting. You've got a fragment. Oh, well, you're fine. You can just delete those fragments. You can just delete those extra fragments. One of the things that you might have done, I don't know for sure if that's causing that, is that you might have a newer version of Android Studio than I did, and that may have changed the template for the basic activity. But you should be able to delete all of those fragments and kind of just go back to what we have here. All right, so lifecycle version, architecture version, we need to add those in. And then there's a lot of dependencies that show up here, okay? So we don't need all of the dependencies here. Again, some of these are optional. Okay, so I'm going to start from the top. I need the view model, so I'm going to bring that dependency in. I need the live data class, so I'm going to bring that in. And I do want, I'm going to go ahead and add that for the, is that the right one? Yeah. Oh, no, I don't want lifecycle only. I don't want that dependency. So I want view model and live data. And then I'm going to add in the saved state dependency here, as well as the test helpers. They're down here. Okay. So that's a start. Now, once we've added all those things, you'll want to hit sync now. Okay, that should make any errors about it being the wrong version go away. One thing I do want to do before I go too far here, we'll notice in the documentation there's an option between two different dependencies. So here it says use the annotation processor is one version, or alternatively, if you're using Java 8, then use this dependency instead. Okay, instead of the lifecycle compiler. Okay, I'm going to do this project. I want to update it to Java 8, so I'm going to do that first before I bring that dependency in. So to do that, we want to right-click on the application here. I'm going to go to Module Settings, and I'm going to change both the source compatibility and the target compatibility to 1.8 and hit OK. All right. So that should have added this section, the compile options, source compatibility 1.8, target compatibility 1.8. So now I can add that dependency here. So I'm going to use the Java 8 version of that dependency because I'm building my project as Java 8. Otherwise, I'll get an error later down in the line where I try to do some Java 8 stuff, and it'll say, oh, you need to switch your dependencies. So these are the dependencies that you should have once you get all that in there. I'm going to go copy all this, link it in Discord. It is in the example project, so you can pull it down from there as well. But I want to put it in Discord just to make sure everybody's at the same point. There. So those are all the dependencies that I have in my Gradle. Okay, so that's for the room dependencies as well as the lifecycle or architecture component dependencies. These are the ones we're going to use today. And then we come back, and when we do part 2 of this example, that's where we're going to actually use these dependencies. So we're adding them now. But we're not actually going to use any of these dependencies here yet. We're just using these dependencies right now. Okay. Now that we've set up the dependencies, the next thing I want to do when I'm setting up a room database is create the entities. So let's do that next. Okay. So I'm going to go on to here, on to step, this is task 2. And there's kind of an explanation of what's going on here. As we work through this, we're going to build these different components. So the first part that we're building here is going to be this entities component. Okay. So I'm trying to build a table that looks like this. It's called the word table. It has just a single column called word, which is the primary key and is also a string. Okay, so I want to model that. So I'm going to right click here. We're going to say new Java class. And we're going to create the word class. Okay, yes, I do want to add that to version control. So I have a word class. Inside there, I need to add my columns. So I'm going to add in private string word. That's all the data that this entity is going to store. Normally, you would have more than one column for a particular table, but this table only has that one column. Okay. So now that I've added the property, I also want to start putting in the field. I want to start adding in some annotations. So at the top, we're going to start adding the entity annotation. Okay. Now, looking at this diagram, I can see that I want the name of the table to be word table. So I'm going to go ahead and set that here. Otherwise, the name of the table would just be word. Oh, table name. That's what I'm doing wrong. So table name is word table. And then I need to add a few annotations to that. So I'm going to mark this as the primary key. It will not be auto-generated. You can see that it's a string, so auto-generation only really works if your primary key is an integer. So I'm going to add that in here. I'm going to say that this primary key cannot be null. So I'm going to add that annotation there. And then I want to specify a few things about that column. So I'm going to say at column info. Okay. So here, for instance, I can specify the name of the column. So I'm going to name the column word, which it's already doing, but this is, again, just to kind of give you an example of where you would use these things. The next thing I'm going to set, again, to show you how you would do this, should you need to do it, You're going to set the type affinity to tell it which data type to store it as. And I'm going to say column. There's a few constants in column info for the different type affinities. So column info dot text. If I wanted the type affinity to be, say, integer, I would use that. If I wanted it to be a blob, it would be that. But I want this here to be text. Okay, so this is a text column. And then I want to specify the collation for it. So collate is equal to column info dot no case. So that way, if I later want to, for instance, search for words, it will do a case-insensitive search, and it also means that I can't add the same word twice, but with different casing. So I can't add giraffe all lowercase and giraffe all uppercase. Otherwise, it would allow me to do both of those things. So that's what I want to do as far as the annotations there. Now, I still haven't added a constructor or any getters and setters. So let's go do that now that we've added all of these annotations. I'm going to hit Alt-Enter on the I'm going to right-click and go to Generate. Okay, and we're going to generate first a constructor. Okay, so that takes in the word and saves it, and then I'm going to generate getters and setters. And you'll see that these things have been marked with that non-null annotation to say you shouldn't really pass in null to this constructor because it's not supposed to be null. This shouldn't return null. This shouldn't take null into the setter. That doesn't prevent the user from actually passing in null there. It just means that if you put a literal null there, it will give you a warning and say, hey, this is not intended. But just be fair forewarned, this non-null annotation does not prevent that variable from ever being null. It still could be null. It just prevents literal nulls. Okay, so it's just kind of to document the intent that it shouldn't be null. Okay, so that is our entire entity. That's our first entity. Any questions about that class? Wrong case, yeah. So one thing, just if you're reading through the tutorial here, you'll see that their imports are all in Android Arc persistent or Android support. You'll see that my annotations are different. They're Android X because all this stuff has moved over to Jetpack. So where things are it's not a one-for-one between those two things. Okay, so that's our entity class, and that defines the schema of the database table. Again, for every database table I have, I'm going to need to create one of these entity objects. So you'll definitely, as you're working through your final project, I would strongly recommend creating an ERD before you start writing this class and running that by me, because I'll probably have some suggestions on your ERD to make maybe make life simpler, or things that maybe is like, oh, did you think about this? So it'd be good as you're working through your final project, ask me about the ERD before you get too far into writing entities, because that will make your life easier. Okay, So that is our entity. I now need a DAO. So I've defined the schema, I need to define the operations. So I'm going to add a new Java class, and this is going to be the word DAO. Okay. So the word DAO needs a DAO annotation. Okay. We can get on to there. Okay. So in the word DAO, oh, I forgot to create this as an interface. Let me just delete that and I'll show you how to create that as an interface. It's not hard to change it there, but just for reference. So if you say, you'll notice that there's no Java interface in this dropdown. But if I say new Java class, it's here. I just go change it from class to interface. So we're going to create the word DAO interface that way. If you forget and you create, this ends up being class, you literally just change that word from class to interface and it works. So that's how I create a new interface. Okay, so we need to add in the methods. So let's say I want to be able to insert words. So I'm going to add a method called insert that's going to take a word. I want to be able to delete all the words. That doesn't need any parameters. And I also want to be able to get all the words. So that's going to return a list of words. I'm going to call it get all words. Okay, so those are the only three operations that I can do on this database. Now I need to add those annotations as we see here in order for it to know what SQL statements to run, how to create this DAO, how to implement it. So I'm going to add those in here. So this needs to be an insert statement, and it'll automatically generate the SQL for that. For the delete, this isn't actually a query, but query just means raw SQL effectively. And I want to specify that this will delete from Word table. So it's going to delete everything in Word table because there's no where clause. If I only wanted to delete some things, then I would need to include a where clause to specify what I want to delete. One thing to know, if you're familiar with other database platforms other than SQLite, you'll know that there's a statement called truncate table. Truncate table deletes everything in a table, all the records in a table. And in most kind of database systems, it is actually quicker. It also means that the auto increment column gets reset back to 1. With SQLite, there is no truncate table statement. In fact, the delete from, it will automatically, with SQLite, it says, okay, is there a where clause? If there's not a where clause, then it does the truncate. So you don't actually say truncate table for deleting all the records like you would in most other database management systems. You just say delete from with no where clause. But it's just as fast as doing it as truncate would be because the optimization is already built in. So that's the thing to know there. And then we need the query for the get all words method. So I'm going to say select star from the word table, order by word ascending. Now, one thing you'll notice in here, if you pay close attention to what I'm doing with this, note that I had to use the name of the table here. So I have the name of the table, which is word table here and there. That relies on me having specified the table name over in the entity class itself. So this is all fine because I've specified the name as word table. If over here in the word I hadn't included this, so for instance this, then it would just be the word, the name of the table would be word, which means this is now an error, and which you can see it's now turning red because it can't find a word table. Okay, this is one of those benefits of it doing the checking at compile time. If the checking was at runtime, then it would just say, okay, that looks like a valid table name, but it wouldn't know that that table name doesn't exist or that that table name is wrong. So because of the compile time checking, it now knows that. Same thing if I were to get the table name wrong, maybe let's call it word thing here. You could see the same, it's same in red, it says it can't find the word table. So that's one thing to check. If you ever see it saying, I can't resolve that symbol, I can't find that name in the table, then that means that your annotation here is probably either missing or incorrect. So that's one thing to check. So word table. So that's the name of the table. That's our DAO. Our DAO is really that simple. You can see that there's not much code in this entity. It's a very simple entity. There's not really all that much code in my DAO. But just by writing this, it'll automatically go do all of the translation. It'll figure out all the code that's needed to turn that SQL into actual working Java code. Yeah, that would do it if you're typing world instead of word. Okay, so let's go to the next step. So our next step is, I'm going to skip step 4, I'm going to go to step 5, and we're going to start building the actual database object. So far we've done the entity, we've done the DAO, we're now going to create the database object. Okay, so here I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call it the word database. All right. And that word database class needs to be abstract. And it needs to extend root database. And apparently my caps lock is on. Extends, room database. Extends room database. Okay. Now, if I forget to put the abstract word in there, you'll see that it gives me this message that says, "Oh, you haven't implemented abstract method create open helper." That's okay. That's okay. We're going to let room go ahead and create that method for us. So we're going to mark this abstract. Okay, and then it's going to be okay that some of your methods are still abstract. That's fine. Okay, so remember to mark that class abstract. Okay, I also need to remember to add annotations to mark this as a database, and I need to specify those entities. So we're going to start with entities is equal to word.class, and version is equal to 1. Now, if you're curious what's going on here with that syntax, let's go look at the entities. You can see that it's an array of classes. That's the brackets at the end. So what we're seeing here in this annotation is we're creating an array. We're creating an explicit kind of array, an array literal is what's happening here. So this is an array of classes. So if I had more than one table, this would look like word class, comma, other dot class. If I had more than one table, that's how I would specify that those other tables are part of the schema. Okay. So In here, we need to define a getter for the DAO. So public word DAO, get word DAO. Okay, so that's our getter. I need to mark that as abstract because I'm not going to implement it. And then I need to add that method to build the actually build the word database instance. Now, the way they show you how to do here, you're using kind of what we call a singleton pattern. So that singleton pattern first involves, hey, you have an instance of an object. And then inside of here, we're saying, well, if we haven't instantiated that instance, then we'll then proceed, and we potentially need to create a new object. The next thing you'll see in there, and this is kind of weird, so I'm saying if instance is null, and then I'm also saying if instance is null again. So in between here, I have a synchronize statement. So that synchronize statement is intended to kind of prevent two different objects from trying to create the database instance at the same time. So this is kind of a multi-threaded problem, saying this thread, one thread is trying to create it and another thread is trying to create it. This might happen if you say, for instance, you have two jobs running at the same time. They might run through this code. In Java kind of terminology, this checking, there's a few different ways to implement a singleton. This is what's traditionally known as double check locking. Double check locking in Java in general is known to be broken. Double check locking in theory should work, but with the reality of how the compiler works, and I've seen this from people who know a lot more than I do about the low level language, and from somebody who's actually worked on the engine, this doesn't work. The way that the compiler works, it can actually decide to remove one of these checks because it's like, well, I've already done it, or move them into an order where either they both happen before the synchronize or they both happen after the synchronize. So this is a pattern that is out there in the Java world for implementing singletons, but you really, really don't want to use it because it's known to not work. So that's why I'm going to build this method in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to use the application object to instantiate this database object, and by doing that, I won't have to deal with any of the multi-threading issues of, well, what happens if one thread creates it at the same time another thread's creating it. That will be dealt with by the fact that I'm using the application object to make sure that only happens once. So that's how I'm going to work around it without using this complicated logic that's there. Okay, so public word database, and I'm going to call this something else, just to be clear that it is something else. So I'm going to call it build database. This needs to take an application. And the reason that I specify that it needs to be an application object is to kind of discourage you from passing in, for instance, an activity context or a service context, because this really does need to be an application-wide context. Okay, so application is a subclass of context, which is why this is going to work out. If application weren't a subclass of context, yeah, this code wouldn't work. But that's the way things are. So I'm good. So I'm going to say return. And I'm going to say return room dot database builder. I'm going to pass in the application as the context. And then I need to specify that we want to build a word database dot class. and then the name of the database file. So this is going to be word_database. Okay. Hit enter, go to the next line. I'm going to line these dots up so the periods are kind of lined up. And then I'm going to say add .add callback. And then I'll define that callback in a minute. Okay. So we're going to add a callback. And I need to specify that the fallback is going to be destructive migration. So anything that changes with the schema is going to mean we just throw the database away and start over. Again, not necessarily something you want to do in a real world example, but that's going to make testing and debugging easier, so we don't have to keep uninstalling and reinstalling the application for our testing purposes if we change the schema. Okay, so that's the start. That's our build database method. Okay, the next piece I need to do is instantiate or define that callback. Define that callback object. So private static final room database dot callback. Okay, I'm going to call this variable callback, and then we need to start creating an anonymous class here. So new room database dot callback. Doop. And then inside of here, at override public void. Oh, no. Let me write that the other way. So if I start by writing maybe on open, there we go. So I'm going to implement the on open method here. I'm going to say this code is going to run anytime the database is opened. So what I want to do in on open is I'm going to delete all the data that's there, and I'm going to put in 3 new rows. Okay, so this method is provided with a support SQLite database object. So on that database object, I can actually directly run any sort of raw SQL statements that I need to run to get things set up. So I'm going to say db.exec_SQL, and this is kind of very simple. This is basically identical to what we did yesterday with the SQLite open helper. We wrote some statements into the onCreate method, and that was where we could, for instance, initialize some data. So same thing here. If I do it non-create, it'll only happen once. If I do it on open, it'll happen every time the application runs. So first parameter, no, there's only one parameter. So I need to write in the statement that I want here. So delete from word table. So that's going to delete all the existing rows from the word table. And then I want to insert my own data. So exec_SQL, again, insert into word table. Now, one interesting thing on the syntax for SQLite, with SQL Server, both this keyword from and the keyword into are actually optional. So I can just say delete word table, or I can say insert word table. But with SQLite's a little bit more strict on a few things here. So that from keyword and that into keyword are required in SQLite, even though they aren't required in some other flavors of SQL. All right, so word table word, because I'm going to specify I only want to insert into the word column. Okay, values, and then I need to specify the values that I want to insert. So I want to insert a dolphin. So that's going to be inserted as the word. And then if I do comma, another set of parentheses, I can insert a second row at the same time. So I'm going to insert Cobra. And then finally, I'm going to insert, oh, well, that was crocodile. Crocodile, and Cobra's last. Now, you'll see that I'm using single quotes in here, and that's simply so I don't have to escape the quotes because I already have double quotes around the string. So using single quotes there means that I don't have to quote things twice. And that's one of the reasons that SQLite is a little bit more flexible around single quotes, double quotes, because in a lot of languages you may be kind of using one or the other to define the string. So that way you can use the one that you're not using to define the string inside the SQL statement, if that makes any sense. So that's the gist here. Okay, so that should initialize the database with those three rows. Dolphin, you can spell it right, dolphin, crocodile, and cobra. So we should have three rows anytime we start this app that has those three things in it. Okay, and you'll notice I didn't anywhere in here have to write the create table statement because it's going to use that entity to create the schema, to create the create table statement. Now, one thing they mention here, up kind of on top, I skipped over it. There is another option you can add in here that says, do you want to export the schema or not? If we set that to false, it won't try to save that file. It won't try to save the current schema to a file. However, having it exported to a file is actually really helpful in terms of A, managing changes, and B, managing changes to schema so you can see those in version control, as well as managing migrations from one version of the database to another. So I actually do want to let it export the schema. Now, in order to allow it to do that, there's going to be an error that shows up if I don't change something in the configuration. I'm going to go ahead and let that error occur so you can see what that error is, and then we'll come back and we'll add that setting to specify where that schema file should be saved. And we can also look at what actually goes into that schema file. So there's my room database class. Okay. So now that I have that in place, what I want to go do is start hooking up the UI to at least a kind of a temporary UI to display this data. Okay, so let's go into the layout. I'm going to go into Content Main. You see I've got this text view here. I'm going to go ahead and expand this to the full width, change the constraint, change the margins to 16. So I'm going to kind of do a similar thing to what I did yesterday, just to display out all the data from the database. Okay, so this is just my simple UI. This control right now doesn't have an ID, so I'm going to give it an ID of text view. Okay. All right, so there's my code there. And let's go now to main activity. Okay, so main activity's got a little bit of code in there already because simply for the reason that we started with the basic activity. So we've got some code for the toolbar, we've got some code for the FAB, we've got some code for the menu and such. I'm going to go ahead and move a little bit of this code around just to simplify how much code we have here. So first of all, I'm going to just take this line that's getting the toolbar and call it find view by ID directly into set support action bar. That'll just remove one line of code there. The other thing is I'm going to go ahead and just remove all of the code for the FAB. I'm going to come back and set the on-click listener through XML instead. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So that'll clean up our onCreate just a little bit for things kind of going forward. Okay. Now I need to have a reference to my database object. So I'm going to save instance variable for that here. Private Word database. Database. And then in here I'm going to say database is equal to Word database dot build. What am I missing? Word database. Oh, I didn't mark that method static. That's what I missed. So I need to remember to mark build database as static. That's why I'm not accessing it. Okay, so that's done. Back here, dot build database. And we're going to pass in the application object through get application. Now, technically, if I'm creating this database object, I probably want to do that through the application. I'm going to start this way, and then we'll go and move it over into the application object in a minute when I create that. So let's start here. So I've got the database. Well, the next thing I'd like to do is go ahead and get the data, right? So let's say I want this to end up as a list of words. Okay. I'm going to say database dot get word dao dot get all words. Okay, let's start there. Okay. So I'm going to run this, and we're going to run into a few issues, and we'll fix those in turn. Okay, I need to close my other version of this app so we can see it crashing. And I'm going to filter down to the error channel. Okay, so let's try to run that again. There we go. So keep stopping. Something crashed. Okay, so first of all, let's scroll up to the top here and see what's going on. So fatal exception, main, yada yada, illegal state, cannot access database on the main thread because it may potentially lock up the UI for a period of time. So as soon as I try to get any data from the database on the main thread, it's going to say, oh, you can't do that. You need to do this on a background thread. Okay, so I need to create a background thread to actually run this query. Okay, so I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of this class, and we're going to start creating an async task object, which is going to take care of running that on a background thread. Okay, so I'm going to call this public class. Actually, this should be a private class. Private class get all words task, and this extends async task. Now, you'll want to make sure anytime you're creating an async task that you specify the generic type arguments before you go any further. Otherwise, it's going to default all those types as object, and you'll have a bit of work to clean up. So let's specify these first. So I want to have this task go and retrieve the words from the database. Okay. So first question is that first parameter, that first type argument is the type of parameter input, right? So I don't need any parameter input, so I'm going to leave that as void. Do I have a progress? Nah, I don't have a progress, so I'm going to also make that void. But what I do have is a result. Okay, so for my result data type, I want that to be a list of words. Okay, so that's how I'm going to define those types. Okay, it takes no inputs, no progress, but it does return a list of words. Now I can hit Alt Enter on here, can say implement methods. I'm going to implement the do in background method. Okay. It calls that params voids, but we're usually going to call that params. Okay, so those are parameters we're getting in, which for this one particular task is nothing. Okay, so I need to run that query on the background thread. That's fairly simple. So I've got the database object, mdatabase.getWordDAO.getAllWords. That's my do in background method. That's really all I have to write for that, at least for now. There may be an issue that we want to, there may be some issues around that, but here's our kind of starting point. Okay. The next thing I want to do is implement the onPostExecute. So onPostExecute, when this gets done, it's going to get that list of words, and then we can show it in the UI. So I'm going to say, well, let's build up a string builder. String builder, call it output. And this is going to be a new string builder. And we're going to loop through each of the words in the list. So word, word, and words. Or if I'm going to be, maybe I'll call that result. So word and result, loop through each of those things. And I'm going to add a line to the output for each word. So output dot append, and we're going to append word dot, we're going to append the word, and then append a new line character. Okay. So for each word, I'm going to put the word and then a new line character into that output, and I'm going to show that output in the text view. So let's say I want that text view. Now, typically I would say, let's only get that text view in the onCreate method, but since I'm about to throw this code away because we're about to remove the text view, this kind of temporary testing code, I'm not going to bother making it fancy. It's really just temporary testing code. So find view by ID, r.id dot text view. Okay, and then we want to set the text there. So text view dot set text, and we're going to set it to output. Okay, so now that we've got this task, that will allow us to run the getAllWords on the background thread instead of having it run on the main thread. I need to actually start this task. So I'm going to go back up here, and rather than trying to get the list of words there, I'm going to say new getAllWords task, and then execute that task. Okay, so when the application starts, it's going to then try to run that task. Okay, and it actually ran pretty quick. So as soon as it came up, you can already see that it's done. Cobra, crocodile, dolphin. Great. Okay, so if you have that all working, we know that we have a working connection to the database. Now, one thing we may want to do, just to specify where the schemas are outputted, because we did mention that we wanted to see the schemas. I'm going to add, going back to the build Gradle, if we look at this page where we found the dependencies, if we look down a little bit deeper, we'll see that they tell you about setting up compiler options. So we want to set these up. So these we're going to set up in the app Gradle, same place we put these dependencies in. And I'm going to go into here. It's under Android default config, so it's under this. And I'm going to add this Java compile options section. Okay, so that's going to be under the default config. Paste that in, clean it up a little bit. So this first setting says that it's going to put it in, says that the schema file is going to be saved to the project directory /schemas. So that's where we're going to find that file. And it's also turning incremental on, which means that every time you do a build, it doesn't have to start completely from scratch. It's going to make your builds quicker. Also here, expand projection. So what that does is anytime we use a star in a query, it's going to automatically expand that to all the column names. So rather than running it as a SQL statement where it's explicitly star, for instance, where we have the word DEO, we've got a star here. Rather than running it as actually star, it's going to put it as the actual column names. I'm going to go ahead and expand that. So that's helpful as far as kind of stability and predictability. So that's how I'm going to set that up. And I'm going to hit sync now and go ahead and run that. Without that, the first time I ran this, it did give me an error. I don't know why it didn't give me an error this time. So let's look at where that schema file is. Now that I put all of those things in here. If I go to version control and look under unversioned files, you should see this 1.json there. Okay, so this 1.json is our schema file. Okay, so this tracks what changes have been made. Yeah, I can put that in there. It's really just put the link here in the YouTube chat. If you follow that link, it's right here. So that will generate this 1.json file. The 1 just stands for the version number. So if it was version 2, it'd be version 2. It would be 2.json. So we've got the version number of the database. We've got hash number here, and that's to help sort out issues if you forget to potentially up or detect issues where you made a change to the schema but forgotten to change the version number. So here we've got the name of the table. Name of the table is word table, and you can actually see the statement that it's using to create that table. You can see the fields, so we can see that it's got a column named word that is typed text. We also see that it's not null. We can see any of the primary keys on that table. So the primary key is word. It's not auto-generated. There's no indexes, and there's no foreign keys. And then there's also these kind of setup queries that manage versioning the database schema. So this is really helpful to have, and it's really helpful to check this into version control because then you can have a history of when the schema changes were made. So you can go back and look at, okay, this developer made a change to the schema, and that change to the schema became because they made these Java changes, and you can figure out, okay, so now how do we need to migrate from users that have this version of the database schema to users that need to now get the newest version of our app and new version of the schema. So this is really useful for seeing that. It also just helps looking at and seeing how the table is actually being created. Because without this, it can be really hard to tell, okay, so what type is my database actually created? Is it a text? Is it an integer? What data type was used? Is it null? All those kind of things. So we can see all of those little nitty-gritty details by looking at this schema file. Okay, so I think that we've been going at this for about an hour, and we're kind of at a good stopping point or pause point if you got all this working. So I think let's take a quick, just a 10-minute break, come back at 3:40, and then we'll do the next piece of this. How did I get the schema file? So the schema file I got by running the application and then going into version control. So it's one of these unversioned files. So we need to be we need to be running the that get all words method needs to be running on the async task. So this is where we moved it to. We removed, you see I commented that line out. If you still have that, I think you probably still have that line in there. So what is it doing, Eston? Is it the same error? What error are you getting when you run the application now? Okay. So that would do it, because the problem is here onCreate is on the main thread. So if we call get all words directly here, then that's also running on the main thread, and that will then crash. Okay, so let's get back to where we're at. So we have a basic start to retrieve all the data. What I want to do next is start making the UI look better than what it is currently. So we're going to start converting that over to a recycler view and those kind of changes. So I'm going to go over to task 8, okay, which is where we're headed. Let's start at the top. Okay, so the first thing I need to do in here is we want to add some colors. These colors we're going to use for several of the tasks coming up. So down here, I'm going to add in all that code. Okay, so we're going to add in all of those colors for primary, light, dark, accent, text primary. That's going to be used in all the things we do in a minute here. Okay, so once you've got those colors in, the next thing we need to do is add some styles. Now I'm going to change that a little bit from what is in the lab, but I'll show you that kind of updated style. So let's go to styles.xml. I'm going to add in a style for text views. So item, and this is going to be the text view style. Oh, sorry, this needs to be style, not item. Style tag. And this is going to be text view style, like so. The parent of that is going to be widget app compat text view. So I'm going to base it on the compatibility text view style. Okay. Few things in here as far as styling goes. As I've previously mentioned, you typically do not want to specify width and height, as well as usually I avoid mentioning changing margins with height and margins in a style because it tends to create conflicts with other things. So rather than specifying the width and the height and the margin here, I'm going to go ahead and specify those still back in my layout. Okay, so this text view style will have a few things, but it's going to have less. So let's start with the text appearance. So I'm going to add in the text appearance style here. Item name is text appearance, Android text appearance. And I'm going to use the app compat text appearances. So at style, text appearance, app compat, large. Okay, so that's going to make this text appear large. The next thing I want to do is change the text color. The name text color. So that text color is going to be one of the constants we just created, which is color primary. Color text primary. Color text primary. I want to also specify the background. So item name background. So the background is going to be color primary light. Okay, so text color primary light, and I want to specify padding as 16 dp. Okay, so those are all the attributes that I'm going to specify for this text style. While I'm in here, let's go ahead and create some other styles that I'm going to use in a bit. So I want a style for edit texts. So app compat widget, app compat, nope, app compat, oh nope, the name, sorry, this is the name, edit text style. So the name is edit text style, the parent is widget dot app compat dot edit text. And then inside of there, I'm also going to set the text appearance to the same thing. I'm going to actually pull all those settings in there, and then I'm also going to add a setting for the hint color. So item name and text color, text color hint, and that's going to be color text hint. Okay, so we're going to change the hint color, and other than that, the edit text style and the text view style are the same. This one just sets the hint color as well, because that's used for edit text. I also want to add a style for my buttons. So this is going to be my button style. Parent is app compat button. And in there, I want to specify the text appearance to be large again, because I want large text on them. I'm going to specify the color of the text. Item name. This is going to be the text color, and the text color is going to be color text primary. So color text primary, which is going to be a white, and then item, the background tint, because this is a button. I want it to be tint, not just background. So background tint, is equal to @color color primary dark. Okay, so those are my three styles. Okay, so I'm going to have one style that's used for the text views, one style that's used for the edit text, and another style that is used for any buttons. So that way I can kind of keep things uniform, keep all my controls looking in a similar fashion. Okay, so those are my styles. Also, while I'm in here, I want to change the background of all my screens to be that yellow. So I'm going to go up to the app theme, add in an item tag here, and I'm going to say background. I want it to be window background. Now, important note here, if you're setting the background, if you say just background, that will change every control in your app to have a default background of that color. And what I want to do is just change the background of the screen to be that color. So it needs to be window background, not background. That's important. The other thing to note here, the other way you could set the background is you could say, well, let's set the background on the layout. The problem with doing that is it actually does have a performance overhead if you set the background on the layout, because it means that it has to draw the screen 3 times. It has to first clear it out, and then put the background on top, and then all your controls on top of that. So it actually can make your animations a lot slower, can make your app overall a lot slower if you set a background on your layout. Okay, so you don't want to actually change the background of your app using a layout. You always want to do it with this window background setting on the theme, because what happens is, rather than having to clear it out to gray and then putting your background color on top of that and then rendering the UI, what it actually will do is it will clear it. Instead of clearing it to gray, it will clear it to the window background. So by making it the window background, you're still only having to do that clear and then the draw on top, instead of having to draw it gray and then draw it yellow and then draw the UI. So that makes what might seem a kind of minor difference between putting it here or putting it in the layout. It's actually a pretty big difference in terms of performance. So especially on lower devices. So all right, so this needs to be color screen background. Okay, so that's what I'm going to set here. All right, that's now done. Let's just do a quick check to make sure that that looks good. So I'm going to go into my layout. I'm going to go to content main. We can see that the background's already changed. And I'm going to go into the text view, and let's apply my text view style. So style equals text view style. There we go. So we can see that that's working. Those are the right colors. I want it to be a background of blue with that particular color there. Okay, so we've added the styles. This is going to go away in a minute, but we'll come back to that. So now that I've got my styles in and I've changed the background color, I want to go and go ahead and create the item layout for the individual items that we're going to show in the recycler view. So that layout I'm going to call item_word. So new Why am I not seeing it? New layout resource file. Okay, so this is item underscore word, because it's a layout for a word. I'm going to go ahead and leave linear layout as the root, because I don't need any sort of fancy layout for this. Now remember, if you are creating a layout for an item, you need to remember to go first and change the height of that item to be wrap content. Otherwise, that item will take up the full screen height. So let's drag in a text view now that we've done that. Oh, I may need to drag it in here. Okay, so my text view, I'm just going to call it text view as the ID. Look at the HTML that I have here. And I am lagging. Wait for my computer to get unfrozen. Let's see, I might have crashed. I hope not. I might have crashed. Yep. Alright, Android Studio. Yep. I don't have to do this too often, but it's definitely got frozen up there. Okay. So let's come back in here. So room word sample, that was what I was having on that screen. And then okay, so back to here. Yeah. Okay, so now that I've got Windows back up, let me look at my layout. So item word is the layout I was working on, and it looks like it didn't save the text view. All right, so let's just add in the text view manually here. Text view. The size of that's going to be match parent. Height is wrap content. Let's see what I have up here. Oh, it didn't save that either. So I need to set the height to wrap content. Close that tag off. The ID is going to be text view. I want to add in some placeholder text. Let me do that in the designer. So pick the text here. I'm going to go to this one with the wrench, and we're going to add placeholder. This is going to be placeholder text. Okay, so that's going to be in there, but it won't be there when the application runs. I also want to set a few things. So I want to set the layout gravity to be center, and I want to set the margin on the top. Actually, before I do that, let me apply the style. So style is equal to text view style. There we go. And then I want to add a little bit of margin on the top, just so that there's some space between different items in the recycler view. So Android, we're going to do the layout margin top, and that's going to be 16 dp. So that way there's a little bit of space between them adjacent items. And I think that's it. Yeah, cool. So that is set up for our item, for individual item for award. And now I need to start adding things for the recycler view. So we go back to content main. And I'm actually going to get rid of this text view in here. So we're going to remove that. So I'm going to go into here. I want to remove the text view entirely. And then I'm going to add in a recycler view. Now, if we kind of look at where our layouts are, we've got an activity main, a content main, and an item ward, right? So remember that these two, the activity main, the content main, both of those were created by the basic activity template. The way this works, we're only ever really going to be showing a recycler view on this screen. So having the extra layout manager in here isn't really something we need. It's actually just taking up extra resources and giving us an extra file. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to just delete the content main entirely here in a second. Because I can just do everything in activity main. I don't need to have two separate layouts for this here. So let's comment out the include statement that's including the other layout. So comment that out, and I'm going to add a recycler view directly here. Okay, the recycler view, the height of it's going to, the width of it's going to be match parent and match parent. Okay, because I want it to take up the entire screen. Now, if you're looking at the preview, you might notice that it looks like the recycler view is kind of going outside of the bounds, right? It's going up above the action bar. And actually, when we run it, it'll be hidden behind the action bar. So I don't want that. The way to fix that is a special little property that sets kind of the scroll behavior. And the place I can find that, if I go to content main and I look at this text, you'll see that there's a long string here for the layout behavior. That layout behavior is what's actually causing the constraint layout not to take up the entire height. So I can do the same thing and just bring that over here. So if I set the layout behavior to this, then it won't overlap the action bar. So that's what takes care of making sure it doesn't overlap the action bar. Okay. So in here, I want to give this control an ID, Android ID, and this will be the recycler view. And now that I've moved everything over, I can actually just delete content main because I won't need it. That way, this kind of simple layout is all in one place rather than being split over two files. Now, if I did need more, controls on that screen. If I wanted to have an actual layout for that screen, I would want to keep that. But since the screen is going to have a recycler view and nothing else, there's no point in really having two separate layout files just for that. You really get the benefit when you have more controls, but if it's just a recycler view and always will be a recycler view, then that's all we need to do. Now that we've added that, that's a recycler view. We've got the layout for the individual items. Let's go test and just make sure it isn't crashing or anything at this point, which probably will be, because I think I'm still referring to my text view. Yes, I am still referring to my text view. So let me go back up to main activity. Oh, yeah. So in here where it's trying to show that text, that's not going to work right now. So let's just comment out that. And that should get it back up to running for the moment. There we go. So now it's running without crashing. I want to start putting in the data. Okay, so we've got a recycler view that's in the layout, and we've got an item for each of the words, an item layout for each of the words. So we're kind of done on the resource side for the minute. So what I want to do is now go back to my the Java folder, and I'm going to create the adapter. I'm going to create the word list adapter. Okay. Now, Alex, so yours is still, you say you're still overlapping. Make sure that you have that. So make sure this is an activity main, and make sure that you have it set up exactly as what's here. At bar, scrolling, view behavior. Yeah, that would do it. Okay, so we want to set up the adapter. So I'm going to create a word list adapter. Here, new Java class, word list adapter. And what we do here should be really familiar, because everything I'm going to do in the adapter is not going to really, is for the most part going to be the same as what I would do if we were loading this data from anywhere else, whether it be hard-coded data or whether it be data from the internet. It's all really the same thing as far as the adapter is concerned. So we're going to say extends recycler view dot adapter. I do need to create a view holder subclass. So public static, or no, yep, public static class. And this is going to be word view holder. And this extends recycler view dot view holder. That needs a constructor. I also need, we add the problem. So we have one field in that layout. It's a text view. Type text view. And I'm going to add in the constructor. So public word view holder view item view. I'll enter. All right, and we're going to call the super constructor with that item view object. Okay, I need to go get the text view. So text view is going to be equal to item view dot find view by ID or dot ID dot text view. Okay, so that's my view holder class. The only thing I have in there is that single text view, because that's how I set up the item word layout. And now we can start actually implementing the adapter. So I need to have a list of words. That's what I'm going to be showing. So private list word, I'm going to call this M items. And inside of there, oh, I do want to mark this final, public final there. Okay, so M items, and we're going to say public, I want a public constructor for my adapter. So public word list adapter. We need to take a context so we can get that inflator. And I also need the list of items. So list word items. And this is going to be M items is equal to items. And I also want to get the inflator. So here, private final layout inflator, M inflator, and this is equal to M inflator is layout inflator dot from context. Okay, constructor's done. I now need to implement the get item count method. So get item count is going to return M items dot size. Now there's an interesting sort of case that we're going to have to deal with in a minute with the live data and such, which we're going to talk again, kind of set up next week. What can happen is that this list can actually come in as null, as it, like if we're trying to show the list of items before it's actually been loaded, then M items is actually going to be null. So I do need to account for that in my code here, so that my application doesn't crash. So M items does not equal null and equals 0. So the size of it is 0 if M items is null. And that's going to deal with, again, cases where maybe the list of items isn't loaded yet. Okay. I also need a method in here to change the list of items. When we get a new list of items, I need a setter. So public void set items. And we're going to take a list of words. This is going to be items. And we're going to say, let's save that list. And then we need to let the recycler view know that the list has changed. So we're going to call notify dataset changed. So save the list of items and then tell the recycler view that our list has changed. And that's going to cause it to refresh everything when we actually get the items loaded. Okay, so those are our first two methods. The next one I need to implement is on bind view holder. So not on bind. I need to do on create first. On create view holder. Inside of there, I need to inflate my layout first. So view item view is equal to M inflator. You use that inflator that we got earlier and inflate the layout. So r dot layout dot item word and parent, and no, we don't want to attach that to the root. Okay, and then here, once we've done all that, we're just going to return a new view holder. So word view holder, new word view holder, and pass in the item view. Okay, so that's our on create view holder, and then I just need to implement the on bind view holder. Okay, so on bind view holder, I want to say word item is equal to m items dot get position. So that's going to give the item that we're trying to show. Now, one thing I need to do here, same way here, m items might be null, so I do need to check for that. So I'm going to say if m items is not null, okay, then we can render that item. Otherwise, we're going to have to show some maybe fallback or some default values. So here I'm going to say if the list is there, then do one thing, otherwise do something else. So if there is a list that we have access to, then I'm going to update the view holder with that data. So holder.text view. Did I do something wrong? Yeah. Okay. Holder.text view. Wait a second. Oh, I forgot to make this word view holder up there. That's what I was missing. And that's going to be word list adapter dot view holder, word view holder. So this on create view holder needs to return a word view holder, and this needs to take a word view holder. That's what I missed. Holder.textView.setText, and then that's going to set it to item.getWord, and otherwise we're going to set the text to just blank, to just empty string. So set text there. Okay, so we have our adapter. We now need to hook it up so that that data actually gets shown. Okay, so I'm going to go, now that I've got the adapter, I'm going to go back to main activity. And we're going to hook that up. So in main activity, I start setting up the recycler view. So private recycler view m recycler view, and I need the adapter. So private word list adapter m adapter, and I also need to have the list of items. So private list word is equal to, so this is, sorry, this is m words. Okay. Yeah. What ordered? Okay. So I have those there. Okay. So down in here, we need to set the recycler view up. So m recycler view is equal to find view by ID. So it should be r.id.recycler view. And the adapter, m adapter is equal to new word list adapter. It needs a context, and it also needs a list of words, which I haven't created a list of words yet. M words is equal to new array list. Actually, I did make it handle null, so I shouldn't actually need that. Should be able to just initialize it there. That. Yeah. Although, yeah, no, I do want to initialize here. So I'm going to say m words is equal to new array list there. Okay. So So those things are updated, and now I need to have the recycler view. We need to set the layout manager. I'm going to use a simple linear layout manager. Pass in this and set the adapter. Okay, so we've got that started. So that's going to initialize all of those pieces that we need to show the data and set up the layout manager, set up the adapter. What I then need to do is when we actually get the data, I need to show it in the recycler view. So if I go back down here to the on post execute of get all words, inside there we should have the list of words now. So I'm going to say m words is equal to the result. And I also want to update the adapter. So m adapter dot set items. That should be m words. Okay, so let's give that a try. Cool. So my items are shown there. Oh, I think what I'm missing, because these are going all the way to the edge, I wanted to have a little bit of spacing. I think in my layout, my activity main, I meant to add some margin. So layout margin is 16 dp. That should bring the recycler view in a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Any questions with what we've done so far? Okay. So there are a few more things to do with this, but we're basically at 425. So I think we'll just leave it at this point. Probably the best breaking point that we're going to have, and come back and finish this on Monday. Unless anybody has some objections. Okay. Save everything that we have here. All right.